The ground shook beneath Commander Zeth Kral's armored feet as another plasma blast tore through the mining facility's outer wall. His scaled hide, thick as battle armor, gleamed with sweat and alien blood. Around him, his Vorthak warriors roared their war cries, their massive claws ripping through the chitinous shells of the Devourers that poured through every breach in their defenses. "Hold the line," Zeth bellowed, his voice carrying over the chaos of battle. His own claws, each as long as a knife blade, sliced through 3 Devourers in a single swipe. The creatures shrieked their alien death songs, but more kept coming. They always kept coming. To his left, the insectoid Scrix warriors moved in perfect formation, their 6 legs carrying them in coordinated attacks that had served their species for 1,000,000 years. Their mandibles clicked in unison as they communicated through pheromones, creating walls of death that even the Devourers struggled to break. On his right, a pack of Fenrathi warriors howled as they tore into the enemy ranks. Their wolf-like forms moved with predatory grace, fangs and claws finding weak spots in Devourer armor with instincts honed by evolution. Behind them, the massive Goron shock troops charged forward like living tanks, their horn-covered heads smashing through enemy formations. For 3 days, this alliance of warrior species had held the mining station on Kepler 442b. For 3 days, they had proven that the Devourers could be stopped. But Zeth could see the truth in the growing pile of bodies around their position. They were losing. The Devourers never tired. They never retreated. They consumed everything in their path and turned it into more of themselves. Every fallen defender became raw material for new enemies. Every lost position gave them more resources to throw at the survivors. "Commander," the voice belonged to Captain Thresh, a Scrix officer whose compound eyes could track dozens of targets at once. "Devourer reinforcements approaching from the north. At least 10,000 units." Zeth's heart sank. They had maybe 300 warriors left. All of them were exhausted, wounded, running low on ammunition. The Devourers had been wearing them down through sheer numbers, and now came the killing blow. "Signal the evacuation ships," Zeth ordered. "We'll hold them as long as we can." "Sir," another voice called out. This one belonged to Lieutenant Garrick, a young Vorthak whose first real battle this was. "Unknown ships approaching from the south. They're not responding to our signals." Zeth turned his attention to the tactical display. 7 ships approached their position, but they didn't match any design in the Alliance database. They were small, fragile-looking things, barely larger than fighter craft. Whatever species flew them was either very brave or very stupid. "Are they Devourer vessels?" Zeth asked. "Negative, sir. The energy signatures are completely different. They're primitive. Kinetic weapons, chemical propulsion, metal hulls instead of bioarmor." The ships landed in the station's courtyard, and Zeth got his first look at their occupants. His jaw dropped open in surprise. They were tiny, these newcomers. Barely half the height of a Vorthak warrior, with soft pink skin that offered no natural protection. They had no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons at all. Most shocking of all, they were using slug throwers. Actual projectile weapons that fired metal bullets. "What are these creatures?" Thresh clicked in confusion. "They look like prey animals." Zeth watched as the small beings deployed in formation. There were maybe 50 of them, wearing simple armor that looked like it would barely stop a Devourer's weakest attack. Their weapons seemed ancient compared to the plasma rifles and energy weapons the Alliance forces carried. "Unknown vessels. This is Commander Zeth Kral of the Vorthak Empire." He broadcast on all frequencies. "You are approaching an active combat zone. The enemy force is too large for your small unit to engage. Recommend immediate withdrawal." A voice crackled back through the comm system. It was strange, with an accent Zeth had never heard before. "Commander Kral, this is Colonel Sarah Chen of the Terran Expeditionary Force. We're here to help. Please maintain your current positions and prepare for combined operations." Terran? Zeth had never heard of this species. "Colonel, with respect, you have 50 soldiers against 10,000 Devourers. This is not a battle you can win." "Roger that, Commander. We'll see about that." The humans, for that's what they called themselves, spread out across the battlefield in a pattern Zeth couldn't understand. They didn't form the tight defensive lines that worked for other species. Instead, they scattered into small groups, taking positions in ruins and behind cover that offered no protection from direct assault. The Devourer swarm crested the hill like a black tide of death. Zeth had seen this sight in 100 battles, and it never failed to chill his blood. The creatures moved as one organism, their collective mind directing them with perfect coordination. No individual thought, no fear, no mercy, just an endless hunger to consume everything in their path. All units prepare for final engagement, Zeth commanded. It has been an honor to fight beside you all. The Devourers charged down the slope, their shrieks echoing across the battlefield. Zeth raised his plasma rifle, ready to sell his life dearly. But before he could fire, the humans opened fire with their primitive weapons. The sound was incredible. Not the clean hum of energy weapons, but a thunderous roar of explosions that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Zeth watched in amazement as the front ranks of Devourers simply disappeared, torn apart by invisible forces. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was what happened next. The humans didn't stand and fight like civilized warriors. Instead, they moved, constantly. Every time a group of Devourers charged their position, the humans were gone, firing from somewhere else. They used the terrain, the ruins, even the bodies of fallen enemies as weapons. One group of humans had positioned themselves near a fuel depot. As Devourers swarmed toward them, they retreated, firing continuously. The Devourers followed, packed tightly together in pursuit. At the last second, the humans dove for cover and triggered an explosion that consumed hundreds of enemies at once. Another human squad had found the station's gravity generators. Somehow they managed to reverse the field in the main courtyard, just as a wave of Devourers poured through. The creatures found themselves suddenly weightless, flailing helplessly in the air while human gunfire picked them off one by one. Zeth had never seen anything like it. These humans didn't fight with honor or strength or even superior technology. They fought with their minds, turning every disadvantage into an advantage, every trap into a weapon. The battle raged for hours, but slowly, impossibly, the tide turned. The Devourer swarm, which had seemed unstoppable, began to falter. Their perfect coordination became a weakness as the humans predicted their movements and laid traps accordingly. Their fearlessness became a liability as they walked into ambush after ambush. By sunset, the battlefield was silent except for the groans of the wounded and the crackle of fires. 10,000 Devourers lay dead, and the mining station still stood. The humans had lost 12 soldiers. Colonel Chen approached Zeth's position, her small face streaked with dirt and sweat. Commander Kral, we need to evacuate this position. Our intelligence suggests a larger Devourer force will arrive within 6 hours. Zeth stared down at her, this tiny creature who had just accomplished the impossible. How? He asked simply. Chen smiled, and for a moment Zeth saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. It wasn't the mindless hunger of the Devourers or the honorable fury of Vorthak warriors. It was intelligence, cold and calculating and utterly alien. We're good at solving problems, Commander, she said. And right now the Devourers are our problem. As the evacuation ships lifted off from Kepler 442b, Zeth found himself wondering what other problems these humans might be good at solving. He had a feeling he was about to find out. 3 weeks after Kepler 442b, Zeth found himself assigned as liaison to the human forces. The Vorthak High Command had made it clear that someone needed to keep an eye on these strange new allies. Zeth suspected they wanted him to protect the humans from getting themselves killed with their reckless tactics. He had expected to spend his time babysitting fragile soldiers and explaining basic military procedures. Instead, he found himself constantly confused by everything the humans did. The first shock came when he visited their command ship, the UES Defiance. Zeth had seen the vessels of dozens of species, from the hive ships of the Skrix to the fortress stations of his own people. Every military vessel he knew was built for war, thick armor, massive weapons. Intimidating design meant to strike fear into enemies. The human ship looked like a flying toolbox. Welcome aboard. Commander Kral, Colonel Chen greeted him at the airlock. Sorry about the mess. We're still making modifications. Mess was an understatement. The corridors were filled with cables, spare parts, and equipment that Zeth couldn't identify. Human crew members hurried past, carrying everything from weapon components to medical supplies, to what looked like cooking utensils. The ship hummed with activity, but not the ordered precision Zeth was used to. Colonel, is your vessel under repair? Zeth asked, stepping carefully around a pile of electronics. Not exactly, Chen replied, leading him toward the bridge. We're adapting. Every battle teaches us something new about the Devourers, so we modify our equipment to counter their latest tactics. They passed a workshop where human engineers were dismantling Devourer weapons they had somehow recovered from the battlefield. Zeth watched in amazement as they stripped away the bio-components and attached them to human rifle frames. "You're using enemy weapons?" Zeth asked. "We're using everything," replied Sergeant Martinez, the lead engineer. "Devourer biotech is actually pretty efficient once you figure out how to control it. We've managed to reverse engineer their acid projectiles and install them in our standard firearms. Tomorrow we're testing Devourer carapace as additional armor plating." Zeth stared at the hybrid weapons. In all his years of war, he had never seen a warrior willing to use enemy equipment. It went against every principle of honor and tactics he had been taught. Enemy weapons were tainted, unreliable, dangerous to the user, but the humans didn't seem concerned about any of that. The next few days brought more confusion. Zeth accompanied human units on 3 different operations, and each time, they did something that made no sense according to traditional military doctrine. On Zerion 7, they were tasked with defending a communications array from Devourer assault. The Vorthak would have fortified the position and fought from prepared defenses. The Skrix would have dug tunnels and attacked from underground. The Fenrathi would have set up ambush points and used hit-and-run tactics. The humans evacuated the entire facility, booby-trapped it with explosives, and let the Devourers take it. Then they waited 3 days until the creatures had settled in and begun converting the facility to their own purposes. Only then did they attack, using the Devourer's own modifications against them. "Why didn't you just defend the facility in the first place?" Zeth asked Captain Rodriguez after the battle. "Because defending is reactive," Rodriguez explained while her squad helped evacuate human engineers who had somehow managed to steal Devourer biotechnology during the fighting. "We let them think they won, then we took advantage of their predictable behavior patterns. Now we have their communications intercepts and samples of their latest biomodifications." On Tau Ceti Station, the humans were asked to provide security for an important diplomatic meeting between allied species. Zeth expected them to set up guard posts and patrol routes like any proper military force. Instead, he found human soldiers scattered throughout the station in civilian clothes, pretending to be maintenance workers, vendors, and even janitorial staff. They had apparently spent weeks learning the habits of every person on the station. "This is completely irregular," Zeth protested to Lieutenant Commander Park. "Your soldiers should be in uniform and following proper security protocols." "Our way works better," Park replied, showing Zeth a tablet displaying detailed profiles of every person on the station. "We know that maintenance worker number 47 usually takes his break at 14:30, but today he's 20 minutes late. We know that vendor number 12 normally sells 30 cups of coffee during the morning shift, but has only sold 8 today. We know that the janitorial staff for Section C includes 1 person who wasn't here yesterday." As if on cue, 3 humans in maintenance uniforms quietly surrounded a Skrix worker near the ventilation systems. The Skrix turned out to be a Devourer infiltrator, so perfectly disguised that it had fooled even Skrix security scanners. "How did you know?" Zeth asked. "He was too clean," Park explained. "Real maintenance workers always have some dirt under their fingernails. Infiltrators never think about details like that." But the moment that truly shook Zeth's understanding came during the defense of New Geneva Colony. The colony was under siege by a massive Devourer swarm, and every available ship had been called in for its defense. Zeth found himself fighting alongside humans in brutal close quarters combat through the colony's residential districts. During the fight, Zeth took a plasma blast to his side that punched through his natural armor. The wound was severe, bleeding badly, and his combat stimulants were already wearing off. In Vorthak culture, a warrior fought until death or victory. There was no shame in dying in battle. He was preparing for an honorable death when a human medic appeared beside him. The man was tiny even by human standards, wearing nothing but light body armor and carrying medical supplies instead of weapons. "Don't move." "Commander?" the medic said calmly, even as Devourer shrieks echoed from the next street over. "I'm going to stop that bleeding." "There's no time," Zeth growled. "The medical bay is 12 blocks away and we're surrounded by enemies." "Who said anything about the medical bay?" The human medic pulled out what looked like a construction tool and began spraying some kind of foam into Zeth's wound. It hardened instantly, sealing the injury and stopping the bleeding. Then he produced a stimulant injector that was clearly jury-rigged from spare parts. "This should keep you going for another few hours," the medic explained, administering the injection. "I cobbled it together from Vorthak combat stims, Fenrathi endurance boosters, and some human painkillers. It's not pretty, but it works." Zeth felt strength flow back into his limbs. The pain faded to a manageable level and his vision cleared. The human had somehow repaired him using equipment that wasn't designed for his species, in the middle of a battlefield, in under 5 minutes. "How did you know how to treat Vorthak physiology?" Zeth asked. The medic shrugged as he packed up his supplies. "I've been studying everyone in the Alliance. You never know when you might need to patch up a Scrix or perform surgery on a Goron. Information is just another tool." As they fought their way through the colony, Zeth began to notice other things. Human soldiers were constantly communicating with each other, but not just tactical updates. They were sharing information about everything: enemy movement patterns, equipment malfunctions, weather conditions, civilian evacuation routes. More surprisingly, they were sharing this information with their alien allies in ways those allies could actually use. When talking to Scrix units, they used pheromone markers and formation diagrams. When coordinating with Fenrathi packs, they spoke in terms of hunt tactics and territory control. When working with Goron heavy units, they focused on target priorities and breakthrough points. It was as if the humans had learned to speak everyone's language, not just literally but conceptually. By the end of the battle, New Geneva was saved, but Zeth found himself more confused than ever. The humans had spent as much time and effort coordinating with their allies as they had fighting the enemy. They treated information gathering like a weapon and adaptation like a strategy. That night, as he watched human engineers already working on improvements to their equipment, based on lessons learned from the day's fighting, Zeth realized something that made him deeply uncomfortable. He had been thinking of the humans as weak allies who needed protection. But looking at their actions objectively, a different picture emerged. They were learning everything about everyone around them, allies and enemies alike. They were adapting constantly, turning every encounter into a chance to gain some advantage. What if they weren't the weakest members of the Alliance? What if they were playing a completely different game than everyone else? Sanctuary Station hung in space like a metal flower, its habitation rings spinning slowly against the starfield. It was humanity's last major stronghold before Earth, home to 12 million humans and the primary staging area for their war effort. Now it was about to become the site of the largest Devourer assault in recorded history. Zeth stood in the station's command center, watching the tactical displays with growing dread. The Devourer fleet approached like a dark cloud, stretching across light years of space. Intelligence estimates put their numbers at over 50 million ships, carrying billions of bio-warriors. "All Allied fleets are in position," reported Admiral Singh, the human commander of Sanctuary Station. She was a small woman, even by human standards, with graying hair and calm eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "We have approximately 8,000 ships of various classes. 8,000 against 50 million. Zeth had seen impossible odds before, but this went beyond impossible into the realm of mathematical certainty. They were all going to die. "Admiral," Zeth said carefully, "perhaps we should consider evacuation. The civilian population could be moved to—" "The civilians stay," Singh interrupted. "This is where we make our stand." Around the command center, officers from dozens of species worked frantically to coordinate the defense. Scrix tacticians calculated optimal firing solutions, while Fenrathi scouts reported on enemy movements. Goron engineers reinforced critical systems while Vorthak warriors prepared boarding defenses. But it was the humans who worried Zeth most. They seemed almost calm, as if they were preparing for a routine operation rather than certain death. The first wave hit them at 0800. Station-time Devourer bioships crashed against the Allied fleet like waves against rocks. The enemy had no concept of tactics or strategy in the conventional sense. They simply overwhelmed through sheer numbers, accepting massive casualties to achieve their objectives. Zeth watched from the command center as entire squadrons of Allied ships disappeared beneath swarms of Devourer fighters. A Vorthak dreadnought, pride of the Imperial fleet, vanished in seconds under concentrated bioacid fire. 3 Scrix hive ships, each carrying thousands of warriors, were consumed by boarding actions and converted to enemy use within minutes. But somehow, the human ships kept fighting. They used the strangest tactics Zeth had ever seen. Instead of forming battle lines like civilized navies, human ships scattered throughout the battle space, constantly moving, never where the enemy expected them to be. They coordinated their movements with Allied vessels in ways that seemed impossible. Vorthak heavy cruisers suddenly found perfect firing solutions appearing in their targeting systems. while Fenrathi raiders received real-time intelligence updates that let them strike at exactly the right moments. How are they doing that? Zeth asked, watching a human destroyer somehow guide a massive Goron battleship through a complex maneuver that resulted in the destruction of an entire Devourer formation. Networking, Admiral Singh replied without taking her eyes off the tactical display. Every human ship is sharing sensor data, tactical analysis, and firing solutions with every allied vessel in real time. We're turning the entire fleet into one massive intelligence organism. The battle raged for 18 hours. Zeth watched wave after wave of Devourers break against their defenses, but the cost was enormous. Half the allied fleet was gone, and the enemy showed no signs of slowing down. Then the Devourers changed tactics. Instead of the usual frontal assault, they began sending infiltrator organisms toward the station itself. These were specially designed bioforms that could perfectly mimic other species. Down to the genetic level, they slipped through the defensive perimeter disguised as damaged allied ships or rescue pods from destroyed vessels. Within hours, Sanctuary Station was crawling with hidden enemies. The infiltrators were perfect copies, so perfect that they fooled even advanced bioscanners and genetic analyzers. A Skrix infiltrator had all the right pheromone signatures. A Vorthak copy had the correct scale patterns and claw configurations. A Fenrathi duplicate even smelled right to other pack members. Panic spread through the station as soldiers turned on each other, unable to tell friend from foe. In some sections, firefights broke out between allied forces who suspected each other of being infiltrators. The defense began to collapse from within. Zeth found himself in Security Section 7, desperately trying to maintain order among a mixed group of warriors who were increasingly suspicious of each other. Two Skrix officers stood on opposite sides of the corridor, mandibles clicking aggressively, each convinced the other was an infiltrator. A Fenrathi pack leader had cornered one of his own subordinates, growling about scent inconsistencies that might or might not be real. "This is insane," Captain Thresh declared, his compound eyes darting between potential threats. "How can we fight an enemy that looks exactly like us?" That's when the humans arrived. A squad of human security officers entered the section, led by a sergeant who couldn't have been more than 20 years old. The humans took one look at the tense standoff and immediately began pointing at specific individuals. You, and you, the sergeant said, indicating 3 different soldiers. "You're infiltrators." The 3 soldiers he had identified, a Skrix, a Vorthak, and a Fenrathi, immediately opened fire, revealing themselves as enemies. The humans had somehow identified the infiltrators instantly, while the rest of them had been fooling even their own species. "How did you know?" Seth demanded. "Behavior patterns," the young sergeant explained while his team secured the area. The Skrix infiltrator was standing too far from the others. Real Skrix maintained specific social distances based on pheromone comfort zones. The Vorthak copy had perfect scales, but he was breathing through his mouth instead of his nose. Vorthaks always breathe nasally unless they're injured. The Fenrathi duplicate had the right scent, but his ear positioning was wrong for someone listening to pack communications. Zeth stared at the human. "You know all that about our species?" "We know everything about everyone we fight alongside," the sergeant replied. "It's called intelligence gathering. We've been studying all of you since the alliance began." As they moved through the station, Zeth watched the humans identify infiltrator after infiltrator through tiny behavioral tells that members of those species had missed. They knew that Goron always touched walls with their left hand when navigating corridors. They knew that Skrix unconsciously adjusted their posture based on the number of allies nearby. They knew that Fenrathi ear movements corresponded to specific emotional states. The humans had been watching everyone, learning everything, cataloging every detail of behavior and biology, but the real test came in the station's reactor core. Zeth and a human private named Williams were making their way through the engineering section when they encountered a group of Devourer infiltrators who had shed their disguises. The creatures had reverted to their true forms, massive, spider-like beings with acid-dripping mandibles and razor-sharp claws. There were dozens of them, and they stood between Zeth and Williams and the reactor controls. If the Devourers reached the reactor, they could overload it and destroy the entire station. Williams was injured, bleeding from multiple wounds, and carrying only a basic sidearm. Zeth himself was exhausted and running low on ammunition. By any reasonable measure, they were both about to die, but Williams didn't seem to realize that. The human began moving through the engineering section like he owned it, using every piece of equipment as a weapon. He triggered steam vents to blind pursuing devourers, then used maintenance tools to electrify metal walkways. When his ammunition ran out, he improvised explosives from reactor coolant and cleaning supplies. For 72 hours, Williams held that position. 72 hours without rest, without reinforcements, without adequate supplies. He ate emergency rations when he could find them, drank water from the cooling systems, and used medical foam to seal his wounds when they reopened. Zeth had seen Vorthak warriors fight to the death, had watched Fenrathi packs take on impossible odds, had witnessed Skrix soldiers hold positions against overwhelming force, but he had never seen anything like this human's simple, stubborn refusal to give up. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found Williams still at his post, still alert, still ready to fight. He had killed over 300 devourers with improvised weapons and sheer determination. How? Zeth asked him as medics finally treated his wounds. How did you keep going? Williams looked confused by the question. Because that's the job, he said simply. Someone had to hold this position, so I held it. It wasn't bravery, Zeth realized. It wasn't heroism or battle fury or any of the things that drove other species to extraordinary acts. It was just determination. The simple human refusal to accept that any problem couldn't be solved if you applied enough effort and intelligence. As sanctuary stations, defenses finally stabilized and the devourer assault began to falter. Zeth found himself looking at his human allies with new eyes. They weren't the weakest members of the Alliance. They were something else entirely, a species that treated every obstacle as a puzzle to be solved, every enemy as a problem to be analyzed and overcome, and that realization terrified him more than any devourer ever had. The War Council meeting took place in the deepest section of Sanctuary Station, in a chamber designed to be completely secure from any form of surveillance or infiltration. Representatives from every species in the Alliance sat around a circular table that had been sized to accommodate beings ranging from tiny Pixari delegates to massive Goron. Commanders. Zeth sat with the other Vorthak officers, watching as Admiral Singh activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the war. The news was not good. Despite their victory at Sanctuary Station, the Devourers were pressing their advantage across dozens of systems. Time was running out. The situation is clear, rumbled Commander Brutask of the Goron forces. We must strike at the Devourer home system before they can launch another assault like the one we just survived. Agreed, clicked General Zixtar of the Skrix. Our forces are depleted, but a coordinated assault might succeed if we commit everything. Zeth nodded along with the other military commanders. It was simple logic: hit the enemy before they could hit you again. The Vorthak had won wars this way for millennia, but Admiral Singh was shaking her head. That won't work, she said quietly. We've run the calculations. Even if we commit every ship in the Alliance, we might destroy 10% of their forces before being overwhelmed. The Devourers have too many ships, too many warriors, too many resources. Then what do you propose? Growled Pack Leader Snarl of the Fenrathi. We cannot simply wait for them to destroy us piece by piece. Singh touched a control, and the holographic display shifted to show detailed analysis of devourer biology and behavior patterns. Zeth had seen similar briefings before, but this one was different. Instead of focusing on weaknesses to exploit in battle, it seemed to be analyzing the fundamental nature of the devourer species itself. We're not going to destroy them, Singh said. We're going to free them. The council chamber erupted in confused roars, clicks, and growls. Free the Devourers? The creatures that had consumed entire star systems? The beings that turned everything they touched into more of themselves? Admiral Singh, Zeth said carefully, perhaps you could explain what you mean. Singh gestured to the display, which now showed detailed brain scans of captured Devourer specimens. Our research teams have been studying Devourer biology since the war began. What we've discovered is that they're not actually a naturally evolved species. The display shifted to show genetic analysis that was far beyond Zeth's understanding, but the conclusions were clear enough. The Devourers were created, Singh continued, genetically engineered by an unknown species approximately 50,000 years ago. They were designed to be the perfect biological weapon. a self-replicating force that could consume any form of matter and convert it into more warriors. This changes nothing, Commander Brutask rumbled. Created or evolved, they are still our enemies. But that's just it, Singh replied. They're not choosing to be our enemies. The Devourer hive mind isn't a natural consciousness, it's an artificial construct. A biological computer that overrides the individual will of every Devourer organism. She touched another control, and the display showed neural pathway maps. Every Devourer drone has the capacity for independent thought, individual personality, personal desires, but all of that is suppressed by the hive mind's control signals. They're not monsters. They're prisoners in their own bodies. Zeth stared at the data, trying to process what he was hearing. Are you saying the Devourers are slaves? Worse than slaves, Singh confirmed. Slaves can at least think their own thoughts. The Devourers can't even do that. They're conscious beings trapped inside bodies that force them to commit atrocities against their will. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Every battle, every dead Devourer, every victory the Alliance had achieved, they had been killing innocent beings who had no choice in their actions. What are you proposing? General Zixtar asked, his voice unusually subdued. Singh activated another display, this one showing technical specifications that made Zeth's head spin. We've developed a way to disrupt the hive mind's control signals. It's a form of directed electromagnetic pulse that can sever the neural pathways connecting individual Devourer brains to the central consciousness. You want to use this against them in battle? Pack Leader Snarl asked. Not against them, Singh corrected. For them. We want to break the chains that bind their minds and give them back their free will. Commander Brutask slammed a massive fist on the table. This is madness. Even if such a thing is possible, how do you know the Devourers won't simply choose to continue fighting us? Singh smiled, and Zeth caught a glimpse of that same cold intelligence he had seen in Colonel Chen's eyes months ago. Because we've already tested it. The display changed to show footage from what appeared to be a medical facility. In the center of the room, a single Devourer was strapped to an examination table. As Zeth watched, human technicians activated some kind of device and the creature's entire demeanor changed. The violent thrashing stopped. The alien shrieks faded to confused whimpers. The compound eyes, which had burned with predatory hunger, now showed something Zeth had never seen in a Devourer before. Fear and confusion and what almost looked like grief. The subject, whom we've designated Alpha, was freed from hive mind control 6 months ago, Singh explained. Initial communication attempts were difficult, but we've made significant progress. The footage shifted to show the same Devourer, now unrestrained, sitting across from a human psychologist. The creature was clearly trying to communicate, using a complex series of clicks and gestures that human linguists were slowly translating. What is Alpha telling you? Seth asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Stories, Singh replied quietly. Alpha remembers being part of a peaceful species called the Kethvar. They were scientists and philosophers, dedicated to understanding the universe through study and contemplation. Then their creators came, beings Alpha describes as the Shapers, and everything changed. The display showed rough sketches that Alpha had apparently drawn, depicting tall, thin beings with technology far beyond anything the current Alliance possessed. The Shapers wanted a weapon that could defeat any enemy, consume any resource, spread across any environment. So they took the Kethvar and modified them, turning their curiosity into hunger, their peaceful nature into aggression, their individual consciousness into a collective mind. Singh paused, letting the weight of that revelation settle over the council. Alpha remembers everything, she continued. Every world the Devourers have consumed, every species they've destroyed, every act of violence committed by his people. He carries the memories of 50,000 years of unwilling atrocities. Zeth felt something cold settling in his stomach. What does Alpha want? Freedom for his people, Singh replied, and justice against the Shapers who enslaved them. The council chamber erupted again, but this time the voices carried a different tone. The military commanders weren't just discussing tactics anymore. They were grappling with the moral implications of what they had learned. Even if this is true, General Zixtar said, the logistics alone are impossible. You're talking about simultaneously freeing billions of individual Devourers across hundreds of star systems. The coordination required has already been planned, Singh interrupted. Human intelligence services have been working on this operation for the past year. We call it Operation Liberation. She activated a new display that showed detailed star charts, fleet movements, and what appeared to be the most complex military operation in galactic history. The plan requires precise coordination between all Alliance forces, Singh explained. We've identified the location of the primary hive mind nodes that control devourer behavior. Simultaneous strikes on these nodes, combined with the deployment of our neural disruption technology, should free approximately 60% of all devourer forces within the first hour. Zeth studied the plan, and a chill ran down his spine. This wasn't just a military operation. It was a complete restructuring of the galactic political landscape. The humans weren't just planning to win the war. They were planning to fundamentally change the nature of galactic civilization itself. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. Singh met his gaze directly. "Since the first day we encountered the Devourers. Everything we've done, every battle we've fought, every ally we've made, every piece of technology we've developed has been preparation for this moment." The terrible truth hit Zeth like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just been fighting the war, they had been orchestrating it. Every victory, every alliance, every moment when other species had thought they were making strategic decisions, the humans had been gently guiding events toward this conclusion. "You've been manipulating us," Zeth said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've been protecting you," Singh corrected. "All of you. Because this was never just about winning a war. This was about freeing an enslaved species and preventing the return of their creators." She gestured to the star charts. And Zeth realized that the Devourer systems weren't randomly distributed. They formed a pattern, a defensive perimeter around something hidden in the galactic core. "The Shapers are still out there," Singh said quietly. The Devourer home system blazed with the light of 1,000 suns as the largest fleet in galactic history emerged from hyperspace. Ships from dozens of species formed a massive arc around the primary star, their weapons trained on the biostructures that sprawled across multiple planets and asteroid belts. Zeth stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the tactical displays with a mixture of awe and terror. The Devourer hive cities stretched across entire worlds, organic towers reaching toward space like grasping fingers. Bioships the size of moons drifted between the planets, their hulls pulsing with alien life. And somewhere in that maze of living architecture, billions of enslaved minds waited for freedom. "All fleet elements report ready," announced Communications Officer Park. "Neural disruption arrays are charged and targeted. Liberation Force teams are standing by." Admiral Singh stood at the center of the bridge, surrounded by holographic displays showing every aspect of the operation. Zeth had spent weeks studying the plan, but he still couldn't fully comprehend its scope. The humans were attempting to coordinate simultaneous actions across 17 star systems, involving hundreds of thousands of ships and millions of personnel. "Admiral," Commander Brutask's voice rumbled through the communication system from his position with the Goran Heavy Assault Fleet. "My warriors are ready to die for this cause, but I still do not understand how you can be certain this will work." Singh touched a control, and a new voice joined the fleet-wide communication network. It was Alpha, the freed devourer who had become humanity's first contact with the Kethvar consciousness. "Commander Brutask," Alpha said in his translated speech, the words carrying a weight of ancient sadness, "I have felt the pain of my people for 50,000 years. Every moment of every day, billions of my kind scream silently in their own minds, begging for release from the actions they cannot control. We would rather die free than live as slaves." Zeth watched the sensor readings as the Devourer forces began responding to the Alliance fleet's presence. Bioships launched from the hive cities in massive swarms, their movements coordinated by the hive mind with perfect precision. It should have been terrifying, but now that Zeth knew the truth, all he could see were the prisoners trapped inside those organic vessels. "Phase 1 commencing," Singh announced. "All units execute neural disruption on my mark." Across the fleet, hundreds of ships activated devices that the human science teams had spent months perfecting. Invisible waves of electromagnetic energy lanced out toward the Devourer formations, targeting the bioantennas that connected individual creatures to the central consciousness. The effect was immediate and heartbreaking. Zeth watched through the tactical cameras as Devourer bioships suddenly stopped their coordinated advance, Individual vessels began drifting randomly, their pilots apparently confused and disoriented. Some ships actually turned around and began firing on their former allies, their crews apparently fighting for control. "My God," whispered someone on the bridge. "It's actually working." But the real shock came when the first freed Devourer ship sent communication signals toward the Alliance fleet. This is Cathvar vessel Sorrow Song," a translated voice said over the communications channel, filled with wonder and pain. We are free. After so long, we are free." More voices joined the communication network as additional ships broke free from hive mind control. Each one carried the same mixture of gratitude and overwhelming grief as beings who had been forced to commit atrocities for millennia suddenly regained their free will. But the liberation wasn't complete. The hive mind was fighting back, sending massive pulse waves to reassert control over the freed ships. Some vessels fell back under central command, their crews once again becoming unwilling weapons. "Phase 2, Singh ordered. "Liberation teams, you are cleared for insertion." This was the most dangerous part of the operation. Small teams of Alliance Special Forces, led by human coordinators, launched toward the primary hive cities. Their mission was to locate and destroy the central consciousness nodes that maintained the hive mind's control. Seth found himself assigned to Liberation Team 7, along with a mixed group of Vorthak warriors, Fenrathi scouts, and human specialists. Their target was a massive biostructure at the heart of the third planet's primary hive city. As their transport ship approached the target, Seth got his first close look at a Devourer world. The entire planet pulsed like a living heart, its surface covered with organic towers that reached high into the atmosphere. Streets were actually arteries, pumping nutrients to different parts of the city organism. The air itself seemed alive, filled with spores and bioelectrical discharges. "Remember," said Lieutenant Chen, the daughter of the Colonel Zeth had met at Kepler 442b, as their ship descended toward the landing zone. "The Devourers we encounter down there are victims, not enemies. Use non-lethal force whenever possible." Their insertion point was a nutrient processing facility that served as one of the hive city's primary nervous system junctions. The team moved through corridors that were clearly alive, walls breathing gently and floor surfaces adjusting to provide optimal traction. They encountered their first Devourers within minutes of landing. A patrol of 6 creatures rounded a corner, their movements showing the characteristic precision of hive mind control. But instead of opening fire, Lieutenant Chen activated a portable neural disruptor. The effect was instantaneous. The Devourers stumbled, their coordinated movement breaking down into confused individual actions. One creature fell to its knees, making sounds that the translation software identified as weeping. "We're sorry," the creature said through the translator. "We're so sorry for everything we've done." Seth helped the liberated Kethver to their feet, feeling the strange texture of their exoskeleton beneath his claws. These beings had been portrayed as monsters for so long that actually touching one felt surreal. "You are free now," Zeth told the creature. "Help us free the others." The liberated Kethvar became their guides, leading the team through the hive city's organic corridors toward the central consciousness node. Along the way, they freed more patrols and work groups, each liberation adding to their growing force of allies. But as they approached their target, resistance increased. The hive mind was concentrating its remaining controlled forces to protect the critical systems. Firefights broke out in the biocorridors, but these battles felt different from anything Zeth had experienced before. The humans insisted on using non-lethal weapons whenever possible, even when facing creatures that were trying to kill them. They deployed sonic disruptors that temporarily stunned Devourer nervous systems, foam barriers that immobilized without harming, and electromagnetic pulse grenades that disrupted the hive mind's control signals. "Why are you risking your lives to avoid killing them?" Seth asked Lieutenant Chen during a brief lull in the fighting. "Because they're not responsible for their actions," Chen replied, checking her non-lethal weapon systems. "How can we punish someone for crimes they were forced to commit?" The central consciousness node was located in the heart of the hive city, a massive organic computer that pulsed with bioelectrical energy. The chamber was defended by hundreds of Devourers under direct hive mind control, their movements perfectly coordinated and absolutely ruthless. The battle for the chamber was brutal. Even with non-lethal weapons, the Alliance team faced creatures that felt no pain, no fear, no mercy. They fought with the desperate fury of beings protecting the very source of their existence. But the humans had planned for this too. Instead of trying to fight through the defenders, they activated a massive neural disruption array that had been smuggled into the Hive City piece by piece over the course of months. The device sent out a planet-wide pulse that severed every devourer from the central consciousness simultaneously. The silence that followed was deafening. Across the chamber, hundreds of devourers collapsed as their own minds suddenly reasserted control over their bodies. The sounds they made were beyond translation, grief and relief and horror and gratitude all mixed together in alien vocalizations that needed no words to understand. Similar scenes played out across the star system as Hive City after Hive City fell silent. Billions of enslaved minds suddenly found themselves free for the first time in 50 millennia. But the liberation came with a terrible cost. As the freed Kethvar regained their memories and personalities, they also had to confront everything they had been forced to do while under hive mind control. Entire species consumed, worlds stripped bare, countless acts of violence committed by their own hands. Zeth watched human medics and psychologists working tirelessly to help the traumatized survivors, offering comfort and counseling to beings who had just awakened from the longest nightmare in galactic history. "How did you know this would work?" Zeth asked Admiral Singh as they surveyed the aftermath of the operation. "Because we studied them," Singh replied simply. "Every battle, every encounter, every piece of data we gathered told us more about who they really were underneath the conditioning. We learned to see past the monsters to the people trapped inside." As the days passed, the true scope of human planning became clear. They had prepared not just for the military operation, but for everything that would come after.